Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a fantastic day. My name is Kmart. I want to talk about some basketball, and today we are going to be talking about the Phoenix Suns, a team that has obviously made a lot of noise in this last off season, and realistically speaking, over the past sort of 6 or 7 months or so. So we are going to talk about Phoenix and obviously um, the moves that they have made in recent times, but sort of more importantly than that, or not more importantly, but more relevant to this video at least, I want to talk about some of the stuff that they have done extremely recently to try and shore up a lineup that is now built around that team's sort of big three, right? Devin Booker, Kevin Durant, and Bradley Beal are the core of the Phoenix Suns now, and actually, let's be generous. Let's throw DeAndre Ayton in there as well, right? There's a four-man core effectively for the Phoenix Suns, and it took a lot of assets for the team to bring those guys together. Now, obviously, there are a lot of risks involved with the lineup, right? I've made previous videos about it. I'm sure you've seen lots of people talk that point to death about how the team's going to work as constructed. That's not really my concern for the sake of this video. What I want to talk about is how the Suns have sort of shored up the lineup around that core, and also how they've prepared for a very sort of uncertain future moving forward. So we'll start with what they did to shore up the rest of the lineup, right? You went out, you got yourself some big names, but those big names also ended up being extremely expensive. Between Ayton, Booker, Durant, and Beal, you're already eating through a pretty massive amount of both the salary cap and the luxury tax threshold. So the Suns had to go and fill out effectively the rest of the roster. They had to go find, 10 or 11 guys to fill roster spots. And they did not move DeAndre Ayton as some people had expected. They thought maybe Ayton could be moved for two or three smaller contracts that could just fill up some of those spots. They did not do that. So instead, they had to go out in free agency and they had to find a lot of guys who were willing to play for limited money and on limited deals in terms of overall time. And that's exactly what they did. They got guys like Yuta Watanabe, Chimezi Metu, Eric Gordon, Drew Eubanks, and Keita Bates Diop were all signed as free agents. They kept Josh Okogie and Damian Lee, guys who were re-signed from their previous roster, and I believe Jordan Goodwin also came to them via trade. Technically, Isaiah Todd did as well, but they then rerouted him somewhere else in one of their more recent trades that they made. So they brought a lot of guys in for relatively cheap, right? That's like eight-ish guys who are brought in to effectively completely recreate the team's bench unit. And the thing about all those players that I just named, right? None of them are fantastic. None of them are going to put up crazy stats. Nobody's out there getting you like double digit rebounds or breaking 20 points per game or anything of that nature. But that's not the point. They are reliable players. They can hopefully hold the line. They can eat minutes and they can get rest for your superstars and not just massively mess everything up and cost you your lead. These are not scrubs, right? They may not be star players, but these aren't guys off the end of the bench. They should know what they're doing and they should be able to buy the time that you need to get your star players rested and then get them back into the game. So that's the move that they make. They shore up the roster for right now. For this season, the Phoenix Suns know what they're about. They've got their stars on this side, they've got their bench depth on this side. Everything's looking okay. When we look to the future for the Suns, though, that's where things get concerning. And that is the point that I really want to key in on for this organization because they have been attempting to create a safety net, a backup plan, I think is probably the phrase that I would go with here. Because they're not just betting on their trades working out and doing nothing else, right? Obviously, they hope that it works out. You go out and you get Kevin Durant, you go out, you get Bradley Beal. You're hoping to win a damn championship. There's no getting around that, right? They're not going to pretend that this was not a win now move. But you need to be ready to support that win now move. And that's what I think the Suns are trying to focus on, and they're not doing a terrible job of it. Um, if we take a look, though, at what they've given up in recent times, since basically the start of the calendar year, this is what they've sort of given away up on the screen here. They've traded away 4 first round picks, just straight up. All of those went to Brooklyn, or will be going to Brooklyn. They've traded 8 total pick swaps. 1 went to Brooklyn, 4 went to Washington, 2 went to Memphis, and I think 1 recently just went to the Orlando Magic. So 8 first round pick swaps. They've also traded away 7 second round picks. 6 of those went to Washington. 1 of them recently was sent to San Antonio. So they've given up a lot of assets, right? I mean, you trade for Bradley Beal and Kevin Durant, you will be giving up a lot of assets. But they're not content to just say, well, those assets are gone. Well, there's nothing more we can do. Let's just hope that Durant and Beal help us win a championship, and that's that. The Suns don't like that, right? It's not a great look for them to just hope that either this roster as constructed works or they're screwed until 2030. Not really great for your front office. So they have attempted to claw a little bit of that back. Since the start of 2023, they have brought back in a total of 6 second round picks, which I know it doesn't sound massively impressive when you just sort of say it on paper, especially considering, as I just outlined, they traded 7 second round picks away. So getting 6 back still doesn't allow you to break even, but it closes that gap a little bit, right? Obviously, these moves, 6 second round picks, that doesn't fully refill the team's coffers. Those first rounders that you're sending to Brooklyn, you're almost certainly not getting any of that back. Those are just gone. But that's not the point here. The true gains from the Durant and Beal trades were Durant and Beal. Right? I mean, I know that sounds pretty straightforward, but that is the point. Those first round picks that you send away, those get you Kevin Durant and Bradley Beal. You're okay with that. But the idea here for the Suns is to not bring back picks that will get them guaranteed talent, right? With second round picks, it's always even more of a crapshoot than a first rounder. But the idea here is for Phoenix to not lose the ability to add players cheaply to their roster in the future, right? That's where we sort of look at some of these moves, some of these second rounders coming back, and that's where we can see the value for Phoenix. And why we can also see the value of the fact that 8 of the picks that they've quote unquote given away are swaps, not straight up trading those picks. The pick swaps might be rough in terms of losing your position in the draft, right? You could end up giving up a pretty solid pick and falling pretty far back in the draft order. But even under the worst of circumstances, a pick swap still results in you selecting a player, right? Unless, I don't know what the exact specifics about protections are. There's some situations where a pick swap, if it doesn't get used, eventually just turns into like a second rounder or something like that. I don't know if that's the case here, but assuming that the pick swap will be used at some point by the teams that they traded it to, Phoenix will still get to select a player, right? They may have given away 4 first rounders to Brooklyn, but the pick swaps will still give them back a first round pick, even if it is the final pick in the first round. So you don't lose the ability to take a player with those 8 pick swaps. And getting 6 second rounders back, spread out over multiple years, but whatever, will still give the team options to select players in those years, and that's the most important aspect of this. The number one thing to consider for the Phoenix Suns is that they need to retain the ability to draft someone, anyone. That is the key here. And you might ask, well, of course, yeah, that's how it is every year. But for the Suns, it is particularly important because we go back to what I was talking about before with the way that they rebuilt this roster. They rebuilt it in the short term. That is sort of the issue here for them. All the guys that they signed under pretty short deals. None of the free agents that they brought in, none of the guys that they re-signed were signed for more than 2 years. I think 3 or 4 of them are on a 1-year deal. The rest of them are on 2-year deals. And they're all relatively cheap. That was the point as well. They didn't have a lot of cap space left. So they brought in guys on cheap deals, basically said, hey, do you guys want to play with Kevin Durant? Do you want to play with Bradley Beal? And that brought a lot of guys in here. But you have to consider, if those guys on short contracts perform well, if they play well in Phoenix, then they could attract better offers from other teams once their contracts expire, and the Suns won't be able to pay them. They won't be able to match that. The whole point of their maneuvers this off season was that they had extremely limited money and needed to sign these guys for cheap, right? So if Josh Okogie or Yuta Watanabe just pops off this season, and goes out there and starts turning heads and earns, even a multi-million-dollar offer, right, from any other team, the Suns may not be able to or willing to match that salary considering their concerns with the cap and the luxury tax. So they would effectively have to let that guy go, and then they're right back where they started, where they need to find someone for cheap to fill out their roster. Well, you could go out and try to play the free agent market. Hope you could do exactly what you did this offseason and find multiple guys who could play for cheap. Or you could use some of your own draft picks, some late first rounders, some second rounders, and get guys who will fill out those spots. Maybe they're not fully ready. Maybe they're not going to contribute in a massive way here. But that's not the point. This team is incredibly front loaded, let's say, with their talent, right? It's going to be Durant and Beal and Booker and Ayton doing most of the heavy lifting. So the 13th, 14th guy off the bench, I mean, I don't want to sound overly insulting to whoever they do pick up later, but that final guy on the far end of the Phoenix Suns bench has to be able to wear a jersey, have a pulse, and run up and down the floor. That's kind of it. You're not looking for contributions from the 14th guy. You're just looking for someone who can play if called upon. And any guy you're going to take in the second round can do that. Even if he scores no points and makes no contributions, that is a person who's going to be able to take that roster spot and play a stretch of 3 to 5 minutes while one of your star players rests. That's really all you're looking for here. So that's where the Suns are trying to sort of take themselves. They're acquiring some second round picks just in case some of the guys they picked up this off season for cheap aren't cheap next summer or the summer after that. And I know there were some people sort of asking the questions like, okay, but what's the deal with the second rounders, right? Why are second round picks being moved around so much, not just for the Suns, but for some of the other teams in free agency as well? And it's honestly a good question, because prior to this, there's always sort of the joke that second rounders were effectively useless, that they basically had no value. I do just want to say that is a sentiment that I think entirely came from fan bases. I don't know how many front offices would genuinely come out and tell you, yeah, we don't give a shit about second rounders, they're useless. I don't think they're going to say that. Second round picks being devalued, I think, was something that kind of came from the fans, because most casual fans know the top maybe 10 prospects in a given draft, but they're not looking into the second round. They're not looking into that second group of 30 guys and really doing a crazy amount of homework there, unless there's a player from their own home market or the college they went to, or something like that. But that was the pervading sort of perspective, that second round picks were kind of whatever, right? Now though, with the new CBA, things get a little bit different, right? The new CBA has some tighter financial restrictions for teams. You've heard a lot of people say that under the new CBA, the structure of teams might change. It might just have to be one or two really, really good players, and then you kind of have to surround them with just okay stuff, right? Like super teams of the past may not be as viable moving forward. Well, second round picks represent a way for teams to add players without really having to pay them all that much. The scale of your contract for a second round pick compared to a first rounder, compared to a lottery pick, compared to a top 5 pick, it's insanely cheap. And it's a way to come and get a guy and get him on your roster for multiple years and spending very little money, right? So already there's an added benefit. Um, there's also the fact that the rules about trading second round picks are far less restrictive than trading firsts. Um, that's part of the reason why the Nets received the 4 picks that they did from the Suns instead of receiving more. There is a rule in the NBA. It's called like the Stepien rule. Stepien. It basically prevents a team from trading its own first round picks in multiple seasons. So that's why the pick swaps had to come in for the Suns here, because they could not trade their own first round picks in back to back years. You have to keep those. That rule is not really as restrictive, or may not even exist for second rounders. You can just throw second rounders out the door as often as you want, as many times as you want. So, well, it still adds a player to your roster, right? It still gets you someone added for cheap. And if you combine that, the idea that, yeah, the restrictions on second round draft picks are not as tight, the new CBA makes them a little bit more valuable, with the fact that fans and teams weren't valuing second rounders as highly over the last 10 to 20 years, there became opportunities that came into existence where you could say, hey, this team doesn't really care about their second rounders. Let's make a deal. Let's go trade for 2 or 3 of their second round picks. And we then get 2 or 3 guys in the future that we get to add. That is the mindset that the Suns are sort of working with here. And that's why they've made some of these moves, right? They trade first round pick swaps to Memphis for second rounders. They trade campaign and a second for a second from San Antonio, right? They just traded uh again with Orlando, I think it was, to get themselves a couple of second round picks back as well. The Suns view all of those second round picks not as chances to get high talent guys. They're not looking for the next generation of players. They're not looking for the replacements for Durant or Beal or Booker. They are looking at opportunities to get guys to fill out the roster, to take up bench slots for extremely cheap. Because listen, Durant and Booker and Beal and Ayton, that is the future for this team for a long time. Not necessarily because they're guaranteed to be successful, but because that's the move that the Suns made. They gave up a lot of assets. They've pinned the entirety of their franchise's hopes for the next few years on that sort of quartet of players leading them to success. And so the plan for everyone who's not those players is round out the roster for cheap. That has to be the game plan going forward. It can't just be round out the roster for cheap this year. It's round out the roster for cheap this year and next year and next year and the year after that, right? So there needs to be a plan in place to find cheap guys to fill out your roster for the next 4 to 5 seasons. And the guys you currently have are signed for anywhere between 1 to 2. So obviously, there's going to come a point where those contracts will expire and your team is still built around your big 4, and you need guys. You need people to fill out the roster, and there's no guarantee, as I said before, that the guys you got for cheap this season will still be that cheap 2 years from now, 3 years from now. So that's where the second rounders come in. They can just fill out the roster with young guys, maybe unproven, yeah, maybe not ready as well, but they don't care. They need bodies, and second round picks ensure that. So if you were wondering, why the Suns were still making moves, why they were trading for so many second round picks and not looking for firsts, that is why. Other teams value their second round picks a lot less. You can get second round picks for a much lower price, and you still have the ability to take a player, regardless of skill, regardless of talent, regardless of potential. And that's what the Suns were looking at. So with that in mind, I think it's pretty damn good, right? Because those first round picks that they sent away, those aren't coming back. You don't have the assets to get first rounders in return, but they had more than enough in their lineup still to get a whole bunch of second rounders. So it's a solid backup plan here for the Suns. Of course, a lot of what the Suns are doing is still going to revolve around those 8 pick swaps, because the Suns are just hoping that that all kind of goes away. As I said before, even with the pick swap, you still retain a pick. You don't lose the ability to draft a player entirely in most situations. But if the Suns are good, if the Suns are competing for championships, then those first round picks that they would need to swap are already pretty far back in the order in terms of the first round, because they're one of the better teams in the league. So those swaps effectively lose their value and don't get used, and the Suns used them as trade chips and didn't actually give up anything. So if that works, then the Suns are sitting pretty. If that doesn't work and they end up giving up value, then these second round picks will become their safety net, their backup plan. So I think it's pretty smart for the Suns. It's the most that they can do right now, but it's definitely something that alleviates some of their concerns moving forward. They might not be as hard pressed to go out and grab guys in the near future. They won't have to do like what they did this season, where they had to go sign like 8 dudes in free agency to make sure that they had a roster that could play. So I don't know. I just want to sort of look over that one a little bit, because they just kept on making moves, and obviously most of the attention was on the Beal trade and the Durant trade, but they continued to move guys to get some of these second rounders, and I think that kind of got lost in the shuffle a little bit, because most people paid attention to the big names, and these smaller moves get sort of less attention, and they should get less attention. These are second round picks as opposed to superstar players, but the Suns are not content to just sort of sit back and roll the dice with their stars. They do want to have a system in place to support those new star players moving forward, to try and keep the roster built around them. So that's sort of my thoughts on the Suns moves right now, but let me know what you guys think. Are we going to see more of this in the future? Things like what the Suns are doing, more teams emphasizing those second round draft picks with the changes to the CBA, with the changes that are going to potentially come to the way teams have to build their rosters. I certainly think so, and I think a lot of people in the NBA sphere sort of agree, but there's always the chance that we're sort of overblowing things a little bit here, right? That's happened in the past. New rules have come out, people have sort of analyzed it and come to conclusions that maybe were, a little exaggerated, and then the truth ends up being far less um what's the phrase, significant, right? It's not as massive of an impact as we thought that it would be. That could be the case here, but yeah, let me know what you think. Let me know what you think of the Suns, by the way, as well. Will this big 3, big 4, if we count Ayton, work out? And do you think that they're going to be able to keep some of these guys, right? The Watanabes, the Metus, Eubanks, Josh Okogie, guys like that. Will those players leave for greener pastures after the 1 or 2 years in their contract, or do you think they stick around in Phoenix if this team finds success? But either way, let me know what you think. But other than that, thank you all so much for watching, and I will talk to you later.